June 4, 1942, Akutan Island, Alaska Territory. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighter lay inverted in the muskeg, its propeller blades twisted like broken fingers, the rising sun insignia half buried in Arctic mud. Inside the crushed cockpit, Flight Petty Officer Tadayoshi Koga sat dead in his harness, killed not by American gunfire, but by the violent deceleration that had snapped his neck on impact. His aircraft, the most feared fighter plane in the Pacific theater, had become a tomb. But it had also become something far more valuable than either side yet realized, a Rosetta Stone that would decode Japanese air superiority and transform American fighter tactics from desperate improvisation into systematic domination. Neither the Japanese naval aviators who searched frantically for Koga's missing plane, nor the American patrol that would stumble upon it 5 weeks later, understood that this single wrecked aircraft would fundamentally alter the mathematics of aerial combat in the Pacific. The Zero had reigned supreme for 8 months, achieving kill ratios that approached 6 Japanese victories for every American fighter lost. Within 18 months of this crash, those ratios would invert entirely. The transformation would not come from American industrial might or numerical superiority, but from understanding the enemy's machine so intimately that American pilots could exploit its weaknesses with surgical precision. The question that haunted every American fighter pilot in the summer of 1942 was brutally simple. How do you fight an enemy you cannot catch, cannot climb with, and cannot turn with? The answer lay hidden in Akutan's tundra, waiting to be discovered. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The recovery of Koga's Zero would not merely provide technical intelligence. It would validate and refine a defensive maneuver that seemed counterintuitive to traditional fighter doctrine, the Thach weave, a mutual support tactic developed by Lieutenant Commander John Smith Thach months before anyone in American intelligence had access to an intact Zero. Thach had created his maneuver through pure theoretical reasoning, watching his pilots die against an enemy whose capabilities he could only estimate. The captured Zero would prove his estimates remarkably accurate and transform his desperate defensive innovation into an offensive weapon. The irony was profound. Japanese naval aviation had achieved technical superiority through ruthless weight reduction and obsessive focus on maneuverability. Every ounce mattered. The Zero carried no armor plating to protect its pilot, no self-sealing fuel tanks to prevent catastrophic fires, no redundant systems to absorb battle damage. This philosophical commitment to offensive capability at the expense of pilot protection had created the Pacific's dominant fighter, but it had also created specific, exploitable vulnerabilities that American pilots, once they understood them completely, could target with devastating effectiveness. The story of how one crashed, Zero transformed American fighter tactics, reveals a deeper truth about technological warfare. Superior equipment means nothing without superior understanding. The Japanese possessed the better fighter in early 1942. American pilots knew it. Japanese pilots knew it. The kill ratios proved it mathematically. Yet, within the Zero's elegant airframe lay the seeds of its own defeat, weaknesses that required only recognition and systematic exploitation. Recognition came from wreckage in the Aleutian mud. Systematic exploitation came from pilots willing to abandon traditional fighter doctrine and embrace tactics that their training had never envisioned. This is the story of how engineering analysis and tactical innovation combined to transform American fighter combat from a desperate holding action into a systematic dismantling of Japanese naval aviation. Part 2. Building the World, the Zero's Dominance, December 7, 1941 through June 4, 1942. 6 months that redefined the Pacific balance of power and shattered every Western assumption about Japanese technological capability. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero had appeared over Pearl Harbor, China, the Philippines, and the Dutch East Indies like a predator from the future, outperforming every Allied fighter it encountered. American, British, and Dutch pilots who survived combat against Zeros returned with reports that their superiors initially dismissed as panic or exaggeration. No fighter could be that maneuverable, that fast-climbing, that long-ranged. The reports were not exaggerated. The Zero's performance specifications seem to violate the fundamental compromises of aircraft design. Maximum speed of 331 miles per hour at 16,000 feet, service ceiling of 33,000 feet, combat radius exceeding 1,000 miles with external drop tank, turn radius so tight that Allied pilots attempting traditional dogfighting maneuvers found themselves flying into Japanese gun sites with mathematical inevitability. The Zero could outturn, outclimb, and outrange every carrier-based fighter the United States Navy possessed in early 1942. American fighter doctrine, developed through observation of European air combat and refined in training, emphasized aggressive individual initiative and offensive pursuit. Fighter pilots learned to close with the enemy, achieve favorable position through superior speed or altitude, and press attacks to decisive conclusion. This doctrine assumed rough parity in aircraft performance. Against the Zero, these assumptions became death sentences. American F-4F Wildcats, the Navy's primary carrier fighter, were slower, less maneuverable, and climbed more poorly than their Japanese opponents. Pilots following traditional aggressive tactics found themselves in turning fights they could not win against an enemy who could outmaneuver them at every speed and altitude. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The kill ratios told a devastating story. In the Philippines, Japanese Zeros achieved air superiority within days, destroying American aircraft on the ground and in the air with losses so one-sided that accurate accounting became impossible in the chaos of retreat. Over Java and Sumatra, Dutch and British pilots discovered that their Brewster Buffalos and Hawker Hurricanes were simply outclassed. The few combat reports that reached Allied intelligence headquarters described an enemy fighter that seemed to violate physics itself. How could a carrier-based fighter with 1,000-mile range also outturn land-based interceptors designed purely for maneuverability? The answer lay in Japanese design philosophy that American engineers, trained in different traditions, had not anticipated. Chief designer Jiro Horikoshi and his team at Mitsubishi had pursued weight reduction with fanatic dedication. Every component was engineered to minimum necessary strength, eliminating any safety margin that might add unnecessary ounces. The result was an airframe that weighed less than 4,000 pounds empty, nearly a ton lighter than the American Wildcat. This weight advantage translated directly into superior performance in every measure except one: structural strength under high-speed maneuvers and heavy battle damage. But in early 1942, that single weakness remained theoretical knowledge at best. American pilots knew Zeros were fragile only through occasional lucky hits that caused catastrophic structural failure. They could not reliably create conditions to exploit that fragility because they could not force high-speed maneuvers on an enemy who controlled engagement terms through superior performance. The Zero's advantages in turn, radius and climb rate meant Japanese pilots chose when to fight and when to disengage. American pilots could not force combat to their terms because their aircraft simply could not catch an enemy who chose to leave. Part 3. The Doctrine Crisis. Lieutenant Commander John Smith Thach faced a problem that tactical genius alone could not solve. As commanding officer of Fighting Squadron 3, embarked aboard USS Saratoga, Thach was responsible for preparing his pilots for combat against an enemy whose capabilities exceeded their aircraft's performance in nearly every measurable category. Traditional fighter tactics, refined through decades of theoretical study and European combat observation, assumed that skilled pilots in comparable aircraft could achieve victory through superior positioning and aggressive execution. The Zero had rendered those assumptions obsolete. Thach was not a theoretical tactician isolated from combat reality. He had studied every available combat report from the Philippines, Java, and early carrier engagements. He had interviewed survivors of Zero encounters. He had personally tested the Wildcat's performance envelope and understood its limitations with engineer's precision. The conclusions were mathematically unavoidable. One-on-one combat between a Wildcat and a Zero, with equally skilled pilots, would result in Japanese victory through simple performance superiority. The Zero could force the engagement into a turning fight where American pilots had no winning options. The traditional response to inferior individual performance was numerical superiority: overwhelm the enemy with numbers, accept higher losses, achieve victory through attrition. This approach had worked in ground combat, where industrial capacity could replace casualties. But carrier-based aviation had operated under different mathematics. Each carrier could launch and recover only a finite number of fighters. Each pilot required months of training that could not be accelerated without compromising quality. Trading 2 American fighters for every Japanese Zero was not sustainable arithmetic, even with America's industrial advantages. The training pipeline could not replace skilled pilots as quickly as combat consumed them. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Thach began developing his alternative approach in early 1942, months before Koga's Zero crashed on Akutan Island. Working without access to enemy aircraft or detailed technical intelligence, he used pure theoretical reasoning based on observed Zero capabilities and known Wildcat limitations. If American fighters could not win individual dogfights, they must never fight individually. If Wildcats could not outturn Zeros, they must avoid turning fights entirely. If Japanese pilots controlled engagement terms through performance superiority, American tactics must create situations where superior performance became irrelevant. The solution emerged through gaming sessions, using matchbook covers on Thach's desk to represent aircraft positions. 2 Wildcats flying parallel courses, separated by approximately 200 feet, could provide mutual support through coordinated defensive turns. When a Zero attacked one Wildcat, that pilot would turn toward his wingman, drawing the Zero across his partner's nose. The second Wildcat would then have a brief firing opportunity as the Zero crossed between the 2 American aircraft. If the Zero continued pursuing the first Wildcat, it would fly directly into the second Wildcat's guns. If it broke off to avoid the second Wildcat, the first pilot would reverse his turn and become the shooter while his wingman became the bait. The maneuver required precise timing, absolute trust between pilots, and rigid discipline to maintain position during defensive turns. It violated every instinct of aggressive individual fighter doctrine. Instead of pursuing enemies, pilots would turn away from them, apparently fleeing. Instead of seeking individual glory through personal victories, pilots would function as paired units where success meant survival rather than kill counts. The psychological adjustment required was perhaps more demanding than the physical flying skill. Thach called it the beam defense position. His pilots, with gallows humor born of understanding its desperate necessity, called it the Thach weave. It was elegant theoretical solution to impossible practical problem, but theory required validation through testing against actual enemy aircraft performing at documented capabilities. Without access to a real Zero, Thach could only estimate whether his defensive weave would actually work or merely provide Japanese pilots with 2 targets instead of 1. Part 4. The Akutan Recovery, June 4, 1942. The Japanese attack on Dutch Harbor in the Aleutian Islands was meant as a diversion, drawing American naval forces north while the main Japanese fleet approached Midway Island to the south. Flight Petty Officer Tadayoshi Koga, flying from the carrier Ryujo, participated in the second strike against Dutch Harbor, his Zero part of a formation assigned to strafe American installations and suppress anti-aircraft defenses. During the attack, ground fire struck Koga's aircraft. The damage appeared minor, possibly a severed oil line or damaged hydraulic system. Koga's wingmen reported seeing him wave, signaling he was uninjured but could not maintain formation for the return flight to the carrier. Standard Japanese doctrine for damaged aircraft unable to reach their carrier required pilots to attempt emergency landings on designated islands where submarines could potentially recover them. Koga selected Akutan Island, 45 miles from Dutch Harbor, where flat terrain near the coast appeared suitable for wheels-up landing. What Koga could not see from altitude was that the apparently flat ground was actually muskeg, saturated tundra that appeared solid from above but offered no support for landing aircraft. When his Zero touched down at approximately 90 miles per hour, The soft ground grabbed the aircraft's belly, flipping it inverted instantly. The deceleration forces exceeded human tolerance. Koga died on impact, still strapped in his cockpit. Japanese search aircraft looked for Koga for 3 days, flying reconnaissance patterns over the Aleutians. They never spotted his overturned Zero, its camouflage blending perfectly with the tundra and its inverted position making it nearly invisible from above. Japanese command eventually listed Koga as missing, presumed dead. His Zero remained undiscovered for 5 weeks, gradually sinking deeper into the muskeg as summer temperatures thawed the permafrost beneath it. July 10, 1942. Navy Lieutenant William Thach, flying a Catalina patrol aircraft on routine reconnaissance, spotted something unusual on Akutan Island during a low-altitude pass. The object's shape was wrong for natural terrain features. Thach circled lower, confirming what seemed impossible. An intact Japanese Zero, inverted but apparently structurally undamaged, sitting in otherwise empty wilderness. The discovery triggered immediate excitement at Naval Intelligence Headquarters. Every previous Zero examined by American forces had been wreckage from combat, burned or shattered beyond useful analysis. This aircraft appeared recoverable. The recovery operation launched within days. The Navy dispatched the salvage ship USS Dent with a specialized team, including aviation mechanics, structural engineers, and intelligence officers. The Aleutian weather provided typically miserable conditions: cold rain, thick fog, winds that made beach landings dangerous. The team reached the crash site on July 15th and began assessment. The Zero had indeed survived remarkably intact. The engine was undamaged. The airframe showed no combat damage beyond the initial ground fire hit that had forced Koga's emergency landing. The inverted position had actually protected critical components from weather exposure. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Recovering the aircraft required solving multiple engineering challenges. The Zero was buried nose first in saturated tundra, its tail section elevated. Simply pulling it upright risked structural damage to the lightweight airframe. The team constructed a wooden framework around the fuselage, distributing lifting forces across the entire structure rather than stressing individual mounting points. They used block and tackle systems anchored to the salvage ship, carefully raising the Zero in stages over 3 days. When finally extracted and flipped upright, the aircraft revealed its condition: structurally sound, mechanically complete, potentially flyable after repairs. The team disassembled the Zero into major components for transport. The wings detached at their mounting points. The engine remained installed in the fuselage. Every component was carefully documented, photographed, and crated for shipment. Koga's body was removed and buried with military honors on Akutan Island, a gesture of respect that would later factor into post-war Japanese-American relations when the story became public. By July 20th, the Zero's components were aboard USS Dent, heading for mainland United States, and the most intensive technical analysis any enemy aircraft had yet received. Part 5. The Technical Revelation, San Diego, California, late July 1942. The Akutan Zero arrived at Naval Air Station North Island, where specialized facilities existed for detailed aircraft evaluation. The Navy assembled a team combining combat pilots with engineering experience, aeronautical engineers with military background, and intelligence analysts who understood the tactical implications of technical discoveries. Their mission was comprehensive: understand everything about the Zero's performance, identify exploitable weaknesses, and provide tactical recommendations for American pilots facing this aircraft in combat. The evaluation began with structural examination. Engineers carefully measured every component, documenting materials, construction techniques, and design choices. The discoveries validated and extended what fragmentary intelligence had suggested. The Zero's airframe used aluminum alloy throughout, but in thicknesses that American engineers considered dangerously minimal. Wing skins measured approximately 0.04 inches thick, roughly half the thickness of comparable American designs. Fuselage stringers and ribs showed similar weight optimization. engineered to minimum necessary strength with virtually no safety margin. The lack of protective systems shocked American evaluators accustomed to different design philosophy. The Zero carried no armor plating anywhere. The pilot sat completely exposed to gunfire from any direction. The fuel tanks, located in the fuselage and wings, were not self-sealing. A single incendiary bullet striking a fuel tank would likely cause catastrophic fire. The aircraft had no redundant flight control systems. Damage to control cables or hydraulic lines would immediately render the Zero uncontrollable. These discoveries revealed the price Japanese designers had paid for superior performance, an aircraft that would disintegrate under punishment that American fighters could absorb and survive. The engine examination proved equally revealing. The Nakajima-Sakai radial engine displaced 1,000 cubic inches and produced approximately 940 horsepower at takeoff, comparable to American radial engines of similar displacement. But the Japanese had achieved superior power-to-weight ratio through different engineering choices. The engine used shorter stroke and higher revolution speeds than American designs, producing more power from similar displacement at the cost of reduced mechanical durability. Combined with the lightweight airframe, this engine provided the Zero with superior climb rate and acceleration. The control surface examination explained the Zero's legendary maneuverability. The ailerons, elevator, and rudder were perfectly balanced and required remarkably light control forces across the entire speed range. American pilots had reported that Zeros could execute sharp turns at speeds where Allied fighters became sluggish. The engineers confirmed this through measurement. The Zero's control harmony remained excellent from stall speed to maximum velocity, while American fighters required progressively heavier control forces at higher speeds, limiting high-speed maneuverability. But the structural analysis revealed critical limitation. The Zero's light-wing structure could not withstand high load factors at speeds above 300 miles per hour. Above this threshold, violent maneuvers risked wing failure. American fighters, built more robustly, could sustain much higher G-forces at high speed. This meant that while the Zero dominated low-speed turning fights, high-speed combat would favor sturdier American aircraft if pilots could force engagements into that regime. The flight testing phase began in late August after technicians repaired crash damage and confirmed all systems operational. Navy and Marine test pilots flew the Zero extensively, exploring its performance envelope and validating engineers' predictions. Lieutenant Commander Eddie Sanders conducted the first flight on September 20th, 1942. His report confirmed everything the technical analysis had suggested and added pilots' perspective on exploiting weaknesses. Sanders noted that the Zero accelerated magnificently and climbed superbly at low to medium speeds. In turns below 250 miles per hour, the Zero could outmaneuver any American fighter effortlessly. But above 300 miles per hour, the controls became increasingly heavy, and the airframe felt fragile under stress. High-speed dives made the Zero tail-heavy and difficult to control. Recovery from high-speed maneuvers required careful technique to avoid overstressing the airframe. Most significantly, the Zero could not follow American fighters in sustained high-speed dives without risking structural failure. Additional test pilots confirmed Sanders's findings and identified specific tactical vulnerabilities. The Zero's lack of armor meant that even light machine gun fire could cause fatal damage. The non-self-sealing fuel tanks made the Zero extraordinarily vulnerable to incendiary ammunition. Any substantial battle damage degraded performance catastrophically because the lightweight structure could not absorb punishment. These vulnerabilities were not theoretical possibilities but engineering certainties, proven through testing and analysis. Part 6. The Tactical Transformation. The captured Zero's technical intelligence reached fleet squadrons through multiple channels simultaneously. Detailed reports distributed to all fighter squadrons contained specific performance data, identified weaknesses, and recommended tactical modifications. Training commands received updated curricula emphasizing new tactical doctrine. Most importantly, combat pilots who had developed tactics through desperate trial and error finally received validation and refinement of their improvised methods. Lieutenant Commander Thach received the Zero analysis in September 1942 while preparing his squadron for deployment aboard USS Saratoga. The technical data confirmed his theoretical assumptions with remarkable precision. The Zero's turn radius at combat speeds matched his estimates. The control harmony he had postulated was verified. Most significantly, the structural weaknesses his weave maneuver was designed to exploit proved even more pronounced than he had calculated. The Thach weave suddenly transformed from desperate defensive measure into systematic offensive tactic. The maneuver's fundamental principle, forcing the Zero into disadvantageous positions by coordinated mutual support, now had technical justification beyond tactical theory. When a Zero attacked one Wildcat and that pilot turned toward his wingman, he forced the Zero to either break off its attack or follow into a crossing shot. If the Zero followed, it entered the brief moment where American guns could target its unarmored fuselage and vulnerable fuel tanks. If the Zero had already committed to high-speed attack, it lacked the maneuverability to avoid the crossing fire without overstressing its fragile airframe. The captured Zero enabled refinement of specific tactical details that made the weave dramatically more effective. Test pilots determined that the optimal separation between paired Wildcats was approximately 150 to 200 feet, close enough for mutual support, but far enough to prevent a single Zero from engaging both simultaneously. The timing of defensive turns could be calculated based on Zero performance data. When the attacking Zero reached approximately 400 yards, the targeted Wildcat should begin its turn toward the wingman, forcing the Zero to either abandon attack or accept unfavorable geometry. American pilots also learned specific engagement parameters that exploited Zero weaknesses. Never attempt slow-speed turning fights where the Zero's maneuverability dominated. Instead, maintain speed above 250 miles per hour, where American fighters' superior structural strength enabled more violent maneuvers. Use altitude advantage to build speed in diving attacks, then extend away in high-speed climbs that the Zero could not follow, without risking structural failure. Concentrate fire on the Zero's unarmored fuselage and fuel tanks, using incendiary ammunition specifically loaded to ignite non-self-sealing tanks. The technical intelligence also revealed a psychological vulnerability. Japanese pilots, trained in the Zero's superior performance, expected American fighters to flee or fight defensively. The Thach weave appeared defensive, with American pilots turning away from attackers. But this apparent retreat was actually tactical positioning. When Japanese pilots followed what looked like fleeing prey, they flew directly into coordinated defensive fire. The psychological impact of this reversal, finding themselves suddenly targeted while attacking apparently defenseless enemies, disrupted Japanese tactical confidence. Training squadrons began intensive practice of coordinated tactics using the verified Zero performance data. Pilots flew repetitive drills, ingraining the precise timing and positioning required for effective mutual support. The emphasis shifted from individual aggressive pursuit to paired defensive coordination. Squadron leaders who had survived early combat against Zeros helped refine the doctrine, contributing hard-won practical knowledge to supplement technical analysis. By late 1942, American fighter squadrons throughout the Pacific were implementing tactics specifically designed around the captured Zero's revealed vulnerabilities. The transformation was not instantaneous or universal. Some squadrons adapted quickly, their pilots embracing coordinated tactics. Others resisted changing from traditional aggressive individual doctrine, but combat results began demonstrating the effectiveness of the new approach. Fighter units employing coordinated mutual support tactics started achieving favorable kill ratios against Zeros, reversing the devastating losses of early 1942, October 26, 1942. The Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands provided the first major test of American fighter tactics refined through captured Zero analysis. Fighting Squadron 10, equipped with Wildcats and trained in coordinated mutual support tactics, engaged Japanese Zero fighters, protecting carrier strike aircraft, attacking USS Enterprise and USS Hornet. The engagement demonstrated both the possibilities and limitations of the new tactical doctrine. Lieutenant Stanley Swede Veitasa, flying from Enterprise, employed the Thach weave principles during a desperate defense against overwhelming numbers of Japanese aircraft. When Zeros attacked his section, Veitasa and his wingmen executed coordinated defensive turns, forcing attacking Zeros to cross between their aircraft into concentrated fire. The tactics worked precisely as the captured Zero analysis predicted. Japanese pilots, expecting individual dogfights where their superior maneuverability would dominate, instead found themselves targeted during attack runs. Veitasa personally shot down 7 Japanese aircraft in a single engagement, a feat that demonstrated how coordinated tactics could multiply individual effectiveness. But the battle also revealed that tactics alone could not overcome numerical disadvantage. Japanese forces sank USS Hornet and heavily damaged Enterprise despite American tactical improvements. The coordinated defensive tactics saved individual fighter pilots and inflicted disproportionate losses on Japanese attackers, but could not prevent determined attacks from reaching their targets when Japanese forces achieved local numerical superiority. The lesson was clear. The Thach weave and related tactics based on Zero analysis provided significant advantages, but required supporting elements including adequate numbers and proper execution to achieve decisive results. Through late 1942 and into 1943, American fighter squadrons accumulated combat experience using tactics informed by the captured Zero analysis. The learning curve was steep. Pilots trained in aggressive individual pursuit had to overcome deeply ingrained instincts to adopt coordinated mutual support. Squadron commanders who understood the new doctrine from technical briefings still had to translate that understanding into practical combat execution under stress. Some units adapted quickly, their pilots embracing coordinated tactics and achieving immediate improvement in combat effectiveness. Other squadrons struggled, losing pilots who reverted to individual aggressive tactics against an enemy whose aircraft capabilities still exceeded American fighters in traditional dogfighting. The statistical evidence gradually accumulated. Fighter squadrons employing coordinated tactics consistently achieved better kill ratios than units still relying on individual aggressive pursuit. By mid-1943, the pattern was undeniable. American fighter units that maintained disciplined mutual support, avoided slow-speed turning fights, and exploited the Zero's structural weaknesses through high-speed attacks were reversing the kill ratios that had favored Japanese aviation in early war combat. The Guadalcanal campaign, from August 1942 through February 1943, became an extended laboratory for testing and refining American fighter tactics. Marine fighter squadrons operating from Henderson Field engaged Japanese Zeros almost daily, providing continuous feedback on what worked and what failed. The Marines, initially equipped with Wildcats and later receiving more capable aircraft, demonstrated that coordinated tactics could offset aircraft performance disadvantages. Marine pilots, using mutual support tactics and exploiting Zero vulnerabilities, achieved approximately 1-to-1 kill ratios, despite flying inferior aircraft, a dramatic improvement from the 6-to-1 Japanese advantage of early 1942. The captured Zero's influence extended beyond tactical doctrine into aircraft development. American aircraft designers, studying the Zero's engineering choices and understanding which characteristics enabled its superior performance, began incorporating beneficial design elements into new fighters while avoiding the Zero's vulnerability-inducing weight reduction extremes. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat, which entered service in 1943, reflected lessons learned from the captured Zero: improved power-to-weight ratio for better climb performance, higher maximum speed to enable diving attacks and extensions, and critically, maintained armor protection and self-sealing fuel tanks that the Zero lacked. The Hellcat's design specifications demonstrated American engineering response to Zero analysis. Maximum speed of 380 miles per hour, substantially faster than the Zero. Rate of climb approaching 3,000 feet per minute, competitive with the Zero while carrying protective systems the Japanese fighter lacked. Most significantly, structural strength sufficient to sustain violent, high-speed maneuvers that would destroy a Zero's lightweight airframe. The Hellcat was not merely a better fighter than the Wildcat. It was specifically designed to exploit Zero weaknesses revealed through the Akutan aircraft's analysis. Part 8. The Strategic Transformation. By mid-1943, the cumulative effects of improved American fighter tactics and new aircraft specifically designed to exploit Zero vulnerabilities began producing strategic results that transcended individual combat engagements. Japanese naval aviation, which had achieved air superiority across the Pacific in early 1942 through combination of superior aircraft and superbly trained pilots, found itself increasingly unable to maintain that superiority against American forces employing systematic countermeasures. The attrition mathematics had reversed. In early 1942, Japanese Zeros achieved kill ratios approaching 6-1, meaning American forces lost 6 fighters for every Zero destroyed. This ratio was unsustainable even with American industrial advantages, because pilot training could not be accelerated sufficiently to replace losses. By late 1943, American fighter squadrons using tactics informed by captured Zero analysis and flying aircraft designed to exploit Zero weaknesses were achieving kill ratios of 3-1 or better in favor of American forces. This reversal reflected not just improved American performance but also the compounding effects of Japanese pilot attrition. Japanese naval aviation faced a crisis that captured Zero analysis had helped create, but that Japanese strategic decisions had made inevitable. Japan's pilot training program produced highly skilled aviators through intensive, time-consuming instruction, but the program could not scale to replace combat losses. Each experienced pilot lost represented irreplaceable capability. American tactics that exploited Zero vulnerabilities accelerated Japanese pilot attrition beyond sustainable rates. The captured Zero had revealed that Japanese aircraft superiority rested on fragile foundation, superior performance achieved through eliminated safety margins. When American pilots learned to exploit those eliminated margins through systematic tactics, Japanese losses accelerated catastrophically. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 demonstrated the complete transformation American fighter tactics had undergone since early war encounters with Zeros. American fighter pilots, now predominantly flying Hellcats and employing coordinated tactics refined through 2 years of combat experience and continuous analysis, achieved one of the most one-sided aerial victories in naval history. In engagements that pilots nicknamed the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, American fighters destroyed approximately 300 Japanese aircraft, while losing fewer than 30 American planes. The kill ratios at Philippine Sea, approximately 10-1 in favor of American forces, represented complete reversal from early war combat. The transformation resulted from multiple factors: superior American aircraft, overwhelming numerical advantage, radar-directed interception, and critically, systematic tactical doctrine that exploited Japanese aircraft vulnerabilities revealed through the captured Zero analysis. American pilots no longer feared the Zero. They understood its capabilities precisely, knew its weaknesses intimately, and employed tactics specifically designed to force combat into parameters where American advantages dominated. The captured Zero's intelligence value extended into 1944 and 1945 as American forces encountered improved Japanese fighters, including the Kawanishi N-1K George and the Mitsubishi J-2M Jack. Analysis teams used understanding gained from the Akutan Zero to accelerate evaluation of new Japanese types. The baseline knowledge of Japanese design philosophy, engineering choices, and tactical doctrine enabled faster identification of new aircraft capabilities and vulnerabilities. The systematic approach to enemy aircraft analysis, pioneered with the Akutan Zero, became standard practice for all captured enemy equipment. Japanese forces never captured and analyzed an American fighter with comparable thoroughness. This asymmetry in technical intelligence proved strategically significant. American pilots increasingly understood their enemy's capabilities better than Japanese pilots understood American aircraft. The intelligence advantage compounded over time as American forces captured additional Japanese aircraft and equipment, building comprehensive understanding of Japanese military technology, while Japanese forces operated with fragmentary knowledge of American capabilities. The human cost of early war air combat, when American pilots faced Zeros without adequate tactical doctrine or technical understanding, remained sobering. Hundreds of American naval aviators died in 1942 fighting an enemy whose aircraft capabilities exceeded their own and whose tactics they imperfectly understood. The captured Zero could not resurrect those pilots or erase those losses, but the intelligence it provided helped ensure that subsequent generations of American fighter pilots entered combat with systematic understanding rather than deadly ignorance. The transformation from 6-1 Japanese advantage to 3-1 American advantage represented lives saved through knowledge gained. Part 9. The Cost of Truth Flight. Petty Officer Tadayoshi Koga never knew that his death would contribute to his nation's defeat. His emergency landing on Akutan Island was pure misfortune, a damaged aircraft and unsuitable terrain combining to produce fatal accident. His decision to attempt landing rather than ditch in the ocean followed standard Japanese procedures. His commander's decision not to destroy the downed aircraft, assuming it had been wrecked beyond recovery or intelligence value, followed reasonable assessment given the information available. None of these individual decisions were mistakes by the standards and knowledge of June 1942. Yet their cumulative result was strategic intelligence disaster for Japanese naval aviation. The irony cuts deeper when examining Japanese military culture's relationship with technological secrecy and tactical innovation. Japanese forces maintained strict operational security regarding the Zero's capabilities before Pearl Harbor, hoping to achieve surprise through technological superiority. They succeeded magnificently in the war's opening months, but that very secrecy, combined with early combat success, created conditions where a single captured aircraft could provide comprehensive understanding of capabilities that might otherwise have required years of fragmentary intelligence accumulation. Japanese forces had built their tactical advantage on foundation of technological surprise. The Akutan Zero's capture eliminated that surprise completely. The transformation in American fighter combat from desperate defensive survival to systematic offensive dominance demonstrates warfare's fundamental truth. Understanding defeats capability. The Zero was objectively superior to the Wildcat in most performance parameters. Japanese pilots in early 1942 were generally better trained than their American opponents. Yet by 1944, American fighter pilots consistently defeated Japanese opponents despite those initial disadvantages. The transformation came through understanding gained from captured equipment, systematic analysis, tactical innovation, and disciplined implementation of doctrine designed to exploit enemy weaknesses while minimizing friendly vulnerabilities. Lieutenant Commander John Thach's contribution deserves particular recognition. He developed the weave maneuver through pure theoretical reasoning before anyone in American intelligence possessed intact Zero. His analysis of the tactical problem, based solely on combat reports and observed enemy capabilities, produced a solution that the captured Zero's analysis later validated and refined. Thach demonstrated that systematic thinking could produce effective countermeasures even against superior enemy equipment. The captured Zero transformed his theoretical solution into proven tactical doctrine, but the intellectual foundation existed independently. Thach received the Navy Cross for his tactical innovations and continued serving throughout the war, eventually retiring as admiral. His weave maneuver remained standard defensive tactic for coordinated fighter operations long after the Zero itself. It became obsolete. The Akutan Zero itself, after contributing to the most intensive technical analysis any enemy aircraft had yet received, continued service as training and demonstration aircraft. Test pilots flew it in comparative trials against new American fighters, providing combat pilots with first-hand experience of enemy capabilities. The aircraft participated in war bond drives, displayed to American civilians as tangible evidence of Japanese technological capability and the importance of industrial production. In late 1943, during a demonstration flight, the Zero suffered engine failure and crash-landed, finally ending its intelligence contribution through accidental destruction. The broader legacy extends beyond specific tactical improvements or aircraft development. The Akutan Zero established systematic approach to enemy equipment analysis that became standard practice throughout the war and beyond. Captured enemy equipment was no longer merely battlefield trophy, but intelligence resource requiring comprehensive technical evaluation, tactical analysis, and rapid dissemination of findings to combat units. This systematic approach to technical intelligence became a permanent feature of American military practice, continuing through subsequent conflicts and into modern era. The mathematical transformation tells the essential story with brutal clarity. June 1942. Japanese Zero fighters achieving 6-to-1 kill ratio advantage over American naval fighters. June 1944. American fighters achieving 10-to-1 kill ratio advantage over Japanese naval aviation. The reversal reflected multiple factors including improved American aircraft, numerical superiority, and progressive Japanese pilot attrition. But tactical doctrine, informed by the captured Zero analysis, provided the foundation enabling American pilots to exploit Japanese vulnerabilities systematically rather than discovering them through costly trial and error. Flight Petty Officer Koga's emergency landing on Akutan Island accomplished what no American intelligence operation could have achieved in months of effort: complete technical understanding of the Pacific Theater's dominant fighter aircraft. His death, meaningless in immediate tactical terms, produced strategic intelligence that accelerated American fighter aviation's transformation from defensive inadequacy to offensive dominance. The cost of that truth, measured in Japanese lives lost to tactics and aircraft specifically designed to exploit Zero weaknesses, ultimately contributed to ending the war that Koga had fought to win. The story concludes where it began, with a crashed Zero in Aleutian tundra and a question about how to fight an enemy you cannot catch, cannot climb with, cannot turn with. The answer, discovered through systematic analysis of a single captured aircraft and implemented through disciplined tactical innovation, transformed American fighter combat from desperate improvisation into systematic science. The Zero that had terrorized Allied pilots across the Pacific became the teacher that enabled its own defeat, its secrets extracted through careful study and translated into tactical doctrine that reversed the mathematics of aerial combat. Understanding had defeated capability. Knowledge had overcome technological superiority. The transformation from 6-to-1 disadvantage to 6-to-1 advantage proved that warfare's deepest truth, the side that understands its enemy, most completely controls the terms of engagement, regardless of initial equipment advantages. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.